Hi, welcome to the Exit Lifestyle Accelerator. I guess we'll call this the interview series since we're starting to do this with multiple professionals like Matt, who have some uh, expertise or value to add around the three freedoms that we help teach around: business freedom, financial freedom, and personal freedom. And so before we kick in, just a bit of background. Matt and I have known each other for a couple of years. We were introduced by a mutual friend that we both have known for probably close to a couple of decades. And and from that initial introduction a couple of years ago, and I started learning about what Matt and his group, Menke Associates, do. I connected them with the powers that be at Cultivate. They're now a strategic partner, alliance partner with us at Cultivate, and they offer a very unique set of services that fit right in with our clientele of that smaller mid-market type of business owner who's looking for a way to have control. How can I take some chips off the table? What if I'm not ready to sell to a third party? What if I don't know exactly what I want my future to look like? But what are the different options for me as far as ways I can transition or set up a transition over time? And I think what we're going to learn today with Matt and what his company provides is that there's a program called an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan, that provides a ton of flexibility for the right fit clients. Not everybody's the right fit for this. And so we do have a lot of people asking us about this. One of the unique things about Matt and his team is that their founder literally helped write the laws and legislation that govern ESOPs. And they're an investment banking firm, happen to be based here in the Chicagoland area, but they only focus on ESOPs. So they are the absolute experts and specialists at this. And I'm excited to have you here, Matt, to kind of share, maybe kind of demystify this. A lot of people aren't aware of this. Some have heard the acronym or even heard the name, but don't really know exactly what it means. And there's probably a lot of misconceptions about, kinds of choice and control that you're giving up and flexibility that you might be giving up that I'm sure you're going to cover today. And so if I missed anything about your company's background or your background, feel free to add it in and just dive into the content when you're ready.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate it, Greg. I'm excited to be here today and to work with participants in the Exit Lifestyle Accelerator. I think it's what you're offering to them is tremendous benefit, and the fact that it touches on so many different aspects of their life and their business above and beyond just helping them figure out how to sell their company. I think that's a great offering. Yeah, I could certainly try to add a little bit more, but you did a great intro for me. So I think I'm going to leave it at that and sort of
Perfect.
jump in from here. So Menke Associates, our firm, we've been in business 47 years. I'm one of 7 investment bankers with the firm. We've also got in-house attorneys that partner with myself and the other investment bankers. We also got ESOP record keepers. So similar to, say, a 401k plan to administer a 401k, we also have record keepers that can administer the ESOP on behalf of your employees who are participants in the ESOP after the transaction closes. And given we're one of the oldest ESOP advisors in the country, we've implemented over 3,500 ESOPs over that time frame. So we do, on average, 1 out of every 4 new ESOPs are done by my firm. We've got a lot of clients. We're also ESOP owned ourselves. So we eat the same cake we bake. We're 70% owned. John Menke, our founder, who helped draft the original ESOP legislation, has been gradually selling his ownership stake in the company to the ESOP. So I'm a participant in my ESOP plan, and it's great. I think, you and your employees may enjoy it as well if you get to that point.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of the things, we are at Cultivate Advisors, we have 700 plus, small business clients that are in growth mode, but we also are growing very fast. So we like to say, hey, we eat our own cooking as well. It's not theory for us. So I think that's one of the things that really attracted your company and our company, that strategic partnership could make a lot of sense. And
Exactly.
we're all walking the walk and not just talking the talk.
For sure. Here's just kind of an overview of Menke, the fact we're quote unquote a one-stop shop. I mean, step one, it's a lot of when I'm first interacting with a business owner or management team that's contemplating an ESOP or just wants to learn more about ESOP. A lot of it's, first step for me, honestly, is viability. Is this would an ESOP even work for your business or the objectives of your shareholders? If it doesn't, then, regroup, focus on maybe what you need to do to get to that point where maybe it does make sense to do ESOP, or maybe it just never will. ESOP's not the solution in every case. There are situations where I've just said, hey, no, it doesn't make sense. And we'll touch on that a little bit later, but it's not the knight in shining white armor, the white knight that's going to come and save you, let's say, at the end of the day. Ability, then it's a lot of free education, just talking through what an ESOP is, because fortunately, it's a very flexible tool. It also makes it very complicated. There's a lot of different options. You got to take the time and invest that time to understand your options and what makes most sense for you and your business, your management team, your employees, etc. But after we're beyond that education stage, that's when we start to get into kind of structuring, figuring out what type of transaction it would look like. What does that mean for you? Are you trying to sell a little bit of the business, all the business, somewhere in between? So we walk through the different processes there and what's associated with that. Maybe it's making sure you can get some bank financing because you want to ensure you get some cash at the time you sell stock. Or maybe it's, hey, I don't really know what the value of my business is. I've run it for the last 30 years. I think it's worth around here to here, but I don't really know. Great, let's go take the first step, get a preliminary ESOP appraisal. See what that looks like, make sure that range of value meshes with your expectations. If it doesn't, then maybe again, work with Greg and his team to focus on boosting the cash flow of the business so that you're at a point where then you can justify the range of value where you want to sell at. And then once you kind of get past that, call it kind of step one design phase, we get into the actual installation. That's where one of my attorney colleagues then gets involved in the transaction. They're working in tandem with me. So we're designing the ESOP plan and trust documents, figuring out.
These are attorneys in-house, right? Because it's very specialized kind of thing.
Yep.
Your existing business attorney is probably not the right person for this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, your corporate counsel will be a great person just to sort of do a quick cursory overview, make sure there isn't any issues from kind of state law compliance standpoint. Us ERISA attorneys, ERISA is the body of law that oversees all the qualified retirement plans, including ESOPs, 401ks, profit sharing plans. And so they're able to do a lot of the work. And my attorneys that I work with, they work on a flat fee basis, whereas your corporate counsel and most attorneys work on an hourly basis, and they could be, recreating the wheel, whereas, we're working on 40, 50, 60 transactions a year. We already know what the wheel looks like and how to make it. We're putting the bolts on and having you get moving down the road per se.
Yeah. Much more efficient, I'm sure.
Yep. Step three is, the transaction where we essentially assume the role of the quarterback, where we're identifying all the different key players that are going to need to be involved. We're going to touch on that a little bit later as well. And then we're designing that. What does that look like for the transaction? Are there other parties involved? Are there multiple shareholders involved? Do we have the management team at the table also negotiating during the transaction? And then again, sort of dovetailing with all that is kind of the financing that we talked about in step one. And how does that play in? Because that oftentimes can really slow down or inhibit a transaction for months sometimes if the bank isn't on board or you don't have a bank to begin with and you need to get one that understands the ESOPs. And then after the transaction closes, you've got the annual upkeep. There are rules and regulations that you're required to follow through on as an ESOP owned company. Every year you have to get a valuation done. There's annual record keeping needs to be done. There's other aspects of the transaction. So we're able to help you through that process as well. I'm not going to read every one of these bullets. ESOPs have been around since 1974. Over 22,000 companies have implemented an ESOP at some point. Today, roughly 7,000 privately held ESOPs. And there's, probably another couple thousand of publicly traded companies that have a small ESOP in place as well.
Interesting.
I like the last bullet on there. I mean, I think that says a lot about America and kind of where we are. Unfortunately, where a lot of the boomers are. The average ESOP account size is $99,000, give or take, and that's 4.5 times the national average. If you look at the national average for retirement savings.
So you're talking about, I just want to be clear here. You're talking about when you install an ESOP, it's not just for the owner or the management team, it's also for the employees. And the average size of the savings that people have inside of all of those accounts, including the employees, is just, shy of $100,000.
Correct. Yeah. So it's, literally less than 20,000 is what, a typical American may have in their savings account right now,
We're
which is
talking about like their 401k, for example.
correct. Yes. Yeah. So, a lot of them are relying on Social Security, unfortunately, at this point. And so, as we'll get into, ESOP's a free benefit to full-time employees that meet other criteria within the business. And so they're getting this other pool of money, or it's another way for them to accumulate wealth to use later in life at retirement, above and beyond what they may have in 401k or Social Security or anything else that they've saved up.
And I'm sure you'll touch on also the psychological benefits of, having your employees act like owners.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on that. So this slide, you can see kind of on the left-hand side, a lot of wins. It's truly one of those, I call it kind of ESOP is a corporate finance tool at the end of the day. It's one of those tools that really benefits everybody, all the stakeholders, if you think about it. The business owner, which we've touched on a little bit, we'll get into more, but it's a way for them to sell stock, leave a legacy, doesn't preclude a future sale. They can certainly sell to 100% of the ESOP today or 10% of the ESOP today and sell to another buyer 10 months or 10 years from now. It doesn't preclude that. But it's a way for them to, you'll see in the second bullet there, increase productivity, maintain the culture, maybe grow the culture. There's a lot of business owners that are calling me right now talking about ESOPs because they're terrified of losing any more employees. We're in a challenging time in this environment.
And the labor market's crazy right now.
Right. And if you can do one thing to sort of differentiate yourself from all the other companies out there and keep folks around or deter folks from considering other offers.
Or to attract in a very tight labor market, why someone would choose you as opposed to your competition to come and work for, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's the third bullet there. It's a company funded retirement plan. It's not like a 401k where it's great if you have a 10% match, which I don't know of any company that offers a 10% match in their 401k, but companies are typically offer 3 to 5% match. ESOP doesn't cost anything. You're going to get ESOP shares in your account every year. Again, if you meet the criteria, we'll talk about a little later, and get that. Whereas if you look at 401ks, some industries, it's great. You get really high participation. Say an architecture firm, for example, you're probably going to have pretty high participation in the 401k. You look at the other end of the spectrum, a manufacturing environment, you're probably not going to see greater than 50% participation among your employee base in your 401k. How do you change that? How do you avoid having your employees, if you're in a manufacturer or some other under invested group that's not in 401ks or other retirement accounts, participate and build some wealth towards retirement?
Yeah. Especially if you don't have your smaller firm that doesn't offer things like a pension or things that are typically associated, at least in the past, with manufacturing type of jobs.
Right. Your customers, your vendors, everyone starts to see over time. And again, the ESOP's not this like magical thing where the day after you establish the ESOP, everybody's jumping up and down and excited because they all have a key to the building and they're owners. But over time, you tend to see the culture change and evolve, hopefully in a really promising way to where the employees start to think and act like owners. And as a result of that, your vendors or your customers are going to start to see that side of them as well that maybe they haven't seen before. Sure, you're going to have your really A players that A plus employees that are going to continue to do what they've always done, but maybe those B's and C's that sometimes are really gung ho and excited for the business. Maybe they're going to bring that to the table every day or more frequently to ultimately benefit the business. And then the government likes it in the back end because they collect taxes when the employees die, retire, leave the business, and they start to get distributions out of their ESOP account. And they pay ordinary income tax rates on those distributions. But again, keep in mind, those employees, they didn't pay anything to get those shares on the front end.
Well, and it's no different than if they have an IRA or a 401k where they got to save that money tax deferred and it got to grow without taxation. But when they spend it later, to get the distribution out of it, they have to pay income taxes. So this is the same as that.
Exactly.
Follows the same rules as are the typical retirement accounts that most of us are familiar with.
Yep. So why are ESOPs so popular? I mentioned earlier on, because it's so flexible. there's no sort of minimum. Well, there's a minimum, I guess you got to sell at least 1% if you're going to sell, maximum 100%. But there's no sort of time requirement. It's not like you can only sell 5% now and then you got to wait 5 years before you can sell more, or 2 years or anything like that. You could sell at any time. I mean, I see a lot of situations where I've got 3 or 4 business owners. Maybe they're different ages, different health situations, different family dynamics. One of them's ready to cash out of the business or exit the business. The other 2 or 3 aren't. Great. And maybe those other 2 or 3 are saying, hey, I've got kids in college. I've got these other obligations. I'd love to buy more of the stock in this business. I can't. I'm not physically able to. All right. The ESOP could step in and serve as that buyer. It's a friendly investor that's willing to step up, and it's indifferent whether or not it owns, like I said, 1% or 100%. It's just bound by, it's got some rules and regulations. Most importantly, it can't pay more than fair market value. We'll touch on that in a bit as well, but any financial buyer, so you or I, if we're not in the business today, we're a financial buyer. Private equity firm, not in the business today, they're a buyer. You know, a competitor, it's a strategic buyer. They can pay a premium to fair market value because, as you know, when they step in and buy the business, they can cut the management team or eliminate some of the back office, so there's savings that they can garner. Whereas an ESOP isn't going to go in and cut anybody. The ESOP's going to say, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, that's great. This is what I can offer you for your stock, but I'm expecting everyone to stay here that's here today, or at least whoever's running the business today is going to be here for at least a period of time. And then you can transition that role later. But, you know, like you touched on, Greg, at the beginning, I mean, it's a way for you to keep control. You'll continue to be on the board. You can continue to run the business. Or I've got business owners that say, I really like this aspect of the business. I hate everything else I have to do for the business. Transitioning, I've got my management team able to take on all those. I just want to focus on this, sales or strategy, you know, whatever it may be. And that's what they do. You know, and obviously they get pulled in on certain situations, but for the most part, they're able to, you know.
Let me ask you a couple questions about the flexibility, because a lot of our clients, of course, in a perfect world, everybody wants like a massive check, all cash at closing, right? And very few businesses actually get that type of an exit. But absent that, most people are not very clear exactly on how or when they want to exit or transition. They realize that, you know, it's coming at some point and they want to prepare themselves, which is the big part of what we focus on, you know, in the Exit Lifestyle Accelerator, which are 2 things: the flexibility, be prepared so you have maximum options, but also that you don't have to wait until you exit to start living your exit lifestyle if we plan for it correctly. So from those 2 aspects, being able to maintain your flexibility, because, well, I don't know who I want to sell it to, or maybe my management team, I'd love it, but I don't think they can afford to buy me, you know, just yet, or even at some point in the future, you know, stroke the check. So how does ESOP come in and add some, assuming it's a fit, how does it help solve those problems for business owners, especially if they're not quite sure exactly which direction, which path? It might be a combination of paths, you know. And I think you make a good point too on when you have partners that are at different stages of life, or just thinking of readiness for exit for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most, you know, basically with the ESOP, I mean, it's funded by the company. So it's either the company takes on debt from, say, a bank, or the company incurs a note, a seller note from the selling shareholders to fund that transaction. And I've got quite a few business owners where, hey, I'm sort of going down this path. Maybe the ESOPs can be the ultimate exit strategy for me, but I'm not quite sure right now. But I want to get some chips off the table because I don't know what's going to happen next year. Maybe there's going to be another pandemic or another great recession. So maybe I'll go ahead and just sell 20 or 30%. That'll give me a little bit of a nest egg. That's enough financing that I've got flexibility on my balance sheet where I can go ahead and go out and get a bank loan for X amount of dollars to buy 20 or 30% of my stock. I can go park that after I pay taxes potentially in the bank, and then I'm good. And now I can spend the next 2, 3, 5 years exploring my options and determine if there's a better path for me. And if there isn't, then great. I've got this vehicle already set up that's ready, willing, and able to buy more stock for me, my ESOP.
And the fact that you have an ESOP is not a deterrent to any of the typical purchasers, right?
No,
private
no, I mean,
equity,
that's why that number I
strategic,
showed you a
or
couple slides back about the 7,000 has been relatively stagnant because a lot of these ESOPs are either doing exceptionally well and they're buying other ESOP owned companies because they want to marry, a like culture business to acquire, or you've got private equity firms, you have family offices, you have strategic buyers. There's so much.
yeah, so they're just not killing it. That just continues to live on underneath new ownership.
Right. Yeah. In some cases, I mean, they terminate the ESOP and say, yeah, we're not going to have an ESOP going forward. Other companies will say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and maintain it. So it really depends on the situation. I mean, there are some private equity firms, for example, that like ESOPs. They want to maintain an ESOP. So they're actively out buying ESOP owned companies or establishing, buying companies and implementing an ESOP. Whereas others are, I don't want to deal with the ESOP. I just want to pay out the employees and their accounts and then run it the way I typically run my fund investments.
So I guess the big takeaway I'm hearing is that having an ESOP in place doesn't preclude any of those options.
Nope. Correct.
So it's still, even though there's a lot of flexibility on how you can structure it on the front side to give you what you want, it sounds like there's a ton of flexibility on the back side as well on how you might ultimately exit the business down the road.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thanks for slowing down on that a little bit.
Yeah. Feel free to do that whenever. So just to kind of like real basic, I mean, I've touched on some of this already, but what is an ESOP? Again, it's a qualified retirement plan. So it's bound by a lot of the same rules and regulations as a 401k or a profit sharing plan. It's overseen by the Department of Labor and the IRS. Those are the two regulatory bodies that oversee ESOPs. And so they're periodically auditing ESOP companies. They're evaluating how a transaction is completed because they want to root out any sort of inconsistencies or mistakes that are made in transactions and ensure that they're done correctly. Because again, the intention is that there's going to be wealth that's going to accumulate in these retirement plans for the benefit of the employees. But big difference between, say, a 401k and other retirement plans is that ESOP is primarily invested in a company stock, i.e. your company stock. And then those investments in there, which are generally almost entirely the stock, maybe some cash, are directed by what's called an ESOP trustee. That's an independent third party. They're hired by the company's board for the benefit of the employees. And so they are tasked with engaging their own legal counsel and engaging their own financial advisor that's going to do the appraisal of the business and arrive at the range of value that they're going to use then to make an acquisition of the stock. ESOP ownership is different than, say, you and I going out and buying Coca-Cola stock or IBM stock. We could go do that today. We have a direct ownership slice of that business where we have the ability to see their financials every quarter and annually, ability to dial in for a board meeting, not the annual meeting of the shareholders. We have the ability to sell that stock a week or a month or a year from now if we don't like the business for whatever reason. ESOP is a little different.
It's also different than ownership in a private company.
Right.
If I'm a partner, if I have 3 partners now, my 100 employees are not going to all be sitting at the table the same way that me and my 2 other partners are.
Correct. Yeah. We'll touch on that in a second in the last bullet there. But yeah, so the ESOP, ESOP is the shareholder. So let's assume, Greg, you just sold 100% of the stock in your company to the ESOP. There's going to be one shareholder going forward. Even if you've got 1,000 employees, it's the ESOP. And then within the ESOP, if you think about it, there's all these little accounts. That's your 1,000 employees, and they each own a slice of the ESOP, and they have their beneficial ownership interest in the ESOP. The ESOP's the shareholder of the company, and that because of that gets to kind of your third point there. Me being an employee of your ESOP-owned company doesn't mean I can show up in your office and say, "Hey, I want to see the salaries of all the folks that do similar job to me," or "I want to see what the budget is for the year." Or
me and the other guys on the floor are frustrated with you, so we're voting you out.
Right. Yeah, we don't have the ability to do that. All we have the ability to do is require that every year you provide us a statement detailing the number of shares we have in our account, the value of those shares, and what percentage of the shares are vested. We'll get into that a little later. Vesting, that it's a concept most people are familiar with, but some may not be. But those are the three things every ESOP owned company has to provide to every employee participant in their ESOP plan.
And that's the kind of work, ongoing stuff that companies like you do that work and provide
Yep.
on
Yep.
behalf of your clients.
Yep. That's what our record keeping group, our ESOP administration team does, is they take the year-end census from our clients. They take the annual valuation that's done at the end of each year. And then they prepare the allocations for each employee's account. And even employees that have left, if they've died, retired, they just left the business, they'll go ahead and track all those allocations as well. And then ensure each individual gets a statement. And that statement only changes once a year. It's not like a 401k statement that's going to change every day that the stock market's open.
Right.
Or even a stock where it's changing minute by minute. Once a year, the value changes for an ESOP.
Perfect.
So a lot of people say, well, ESOPs are only good if you're in XYZ industry or this industry. And that's really not the case. You can see this. I mean, it's a pretty diverse pool of businesses that have an ESOP in place. I can tell you, I mean, some of the transactions I'm working on right now, I've got one in the kind of the software space. I've got one that's construction area. I've got another one that's actually, I got two in the construction space. I've got another one that's my mind just went blank. One of my other ones. I've got one that's in like food distribution. I mean, it's across the board, types of businesses and industries, and some are very small, with 15 employees. I've got others that have hundreds of employees that are
that makes sense to me. I remember like the .com before the bubble burst, late 90s, early 2000s. For lots of friends of mine, were getting recruited by the latest tech company, and every offer had like this insane, like, you're going to get all of these shares that are going to make you a millionaire, right? But they're giving like legit shares out as part of that, as opposed to if you have an ESOP in place, you could give the financial benefit of shares without messing up with the way the business dilution of the stock, over time.
Right. Yeah, and we'll get in. I mean, there is some dilution because oftentimes a lot of the ESOPs will have a phantom stock plan or some sort of management incentive plan for their senior leadership team to give them some additional incentive above and beyond the ESOP. Because at the end of the day, the ESOP has to be awarded to all, shares have to be awarded to all the employees. So there are some limitations, like your really high earners sometimes can get capped out.
Yeah, so but that would be an add-on type of planning objective.
Yep.
That just layers exactly on top of it.
Yep. Here, just this slide, just graphic just shows you kind of the employee size. Again, it's pretty
still a pretty good swatch in even the less than 50. That's a pretty good percentage.
Oh yeah.
Small companies with an ESOP.
Yeah. I mean, when you see kind of over 1,000 employees, those companies tend to have a lot of different capital markets options available to them.
Yeah.
Some of them still pursue ESOPs, but not necessarily everyone. That's, as you can see, not all as many in that space market segment as some of the others pursue an ESOP. So next part, I'm just going to start to get into some basic ESOP structures. Again, we talked about this before, the flexibility. Just because you don't see it on any of the following slides doesn't mean it can't be done. Maybe it's just a little more unique, or there's some additional steps in the process. And
so this is all part of. This is to put a picture being worth 1,000 words of what the outcome of that step one of design, feasibility first, education, and then ultimately a customized design plan could look like. But this this is not all inclusive. There's lots of different ways that you guys could do this once you knew more about someone's circumstance.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool.
So some different just general ESOP structures here. I mean, I touched on one of them earlier where you've got 2, 3, 4 business owners, and you're at different stages. Our ESOP and family. I just talked with a company Friday, the other day, that the family's ready to sell, but management team's involved. But the family wants to stay involved in the business to some degree. So they're going to start out and do, say, a 30% transaction or 40% transaction assuming they like how that goes, at some point, they're going to probably gradually sell more stock. Will it ever get to 100%? Who knows? But it doesn't matter. That's not their objective today. So how is the ESOP structured? So you think about it today, you've got your company, and then above it is the shareholder group, whatever that may consist of. Going forward, you're going to have either that shareholder group and then another box next to it, or another bubble next to it, where you've got the ESOP. And these hold stock as well. Again, it's for the benefit of the employees, but it's in a tax exempt trust. So any sort of tax obligations of the company are going to be on the company, not on the trust. Similar to how ownership may be today, but again, it depends how you're organized, S Corp, C Corp, LLC, everything works a little bit differently, but we're going to get into that in a short while here too.
Yeah, and I think, for the people who are watching this, just understand that like the way that your business is taxed on certain things has nothing to do with what's inside the ESOP, just like it has nothing to do with what's inside the 401k. If you guys have 401ks at your company, these are separate things governed by different laws.
Yep. Yeah. And then, the last bullet down there, the trust shares, there are situations where the ESOP has to vote its shares. Generally, all that voting is done by the ESOP trustee on behalf of the employees. But there are certain situations we'll get into where there can be a pass-through vote to where the employees will actually vote their percentage of their shares that they own in the company. Those are pretty few and far situations where that happens. But generally, for the most part, it's the ESOP trustee, and the trustee is working with the board. They have a seat on the board, or they typically have an individual that represents them on the board. Mm-hmm. And then shares that information with them, whatever's discussed in the meeting. Some ESOP misconceptions. There's quite a few out there. If you Google ESOP, you're bound to run across situations where ESOP has to borrow money, or you have to sell a certain amount, or you have to sell the stock right away, or this price might be lower, or the owners, it's more expensive than alternative B. That's generally not true. You're always going to find a situation where maybe it could be true, some of these, but a lot of these aren't true ever. We'll get into that a little bit more as well. But yeah, an ESOP doesn't have to borrow money, doesn't from a bank. You don't have to sell 30%. You could sell whatever percent you want to. It's, again, just governed by fair market value. So the four basic kind of ESOP transactions.
I'll make one point just for the people listening. And fair market value in this context is a regulated formula for how to do evaluation. Not necessarily the same as how you might think of it as what a willing buyer and a willing seller come to terms on. This is the government, because there's some tax benefits to this, they're putting some rules in the road around how the valuation is done, so there's some consistency in how this is managed over time.
Yep, agreed. So the four basic kind of structures, we'll go through each of these. First structure is you contribute cash. The company contributes.
If the company's got a bunch of excess cash, they don't need to go get a loan. They could take some of their retained earnings and buy up a chunk of it, and that's how you're funding the money that goes in the various accounts, including yours.
Yep. Yeah. Another one would be borrow cash, either from the selling shareholders or from the bank or both. That's another option. Contributing stock directly to the ESOP. You can, as a shareholder, you could just contribute stock to the ESOP, take a tax deduction for the value of the stock that you've contributed, or use cash in the ESOP to just buy treasury shares if you've got cash built up. And so we'll walk through here. This first one, situation where we're going to use a cash contribution and then buy stock from the selling shareholder. So in this situation, the company can contribute up to 25% of its payroll to any qualified retirement plan. So if there's already a 401k in place and the company's contributing a 5% match to that, the maximum it can contribute to an ESOP or any other retirement plan would be 20%, for example. So let's just assume there isn't, for this case, keep it simple. There's no 401k. The company's payroll is $1 million. We'll keep the math really simple. So 25% of that would be $250,000. Company contributes $250,000 to the ESOP. ESOP then takes that $250,000, gives it to the selling shareholder in exchange for whatever percentage stock that equals to. And then the selling shareholder can take the 250,000 and go talk to their stockbroker or whoever they want to about, all right, what can I do? I'm just diversifying myself rather than having most of my wealth tied up in my business. I've now pulled a little bit out, parked it over here.
Yeah, so I want to point out two things real quick, just to make sure people see it. That number one, if you're the owner, you own that company in the green box, and you decide to do this, and we're going to use the same math, $1 million payroll, 25% of that's 250. You contribute 250 into the ESOP. Your company gets a $250,000 tax deduction each year that you do that. Okay, so your taxable income, most of us have S corps, LLC, pass-throughs for the most part, are predominant. So your taxable income is reduced by that $250,000. All 250 then in this case is being used for you to go and get $250,000 worth of diversification.
Exactly.
Taking chips off the table. And if you did this every year, that could be, you could repeat this more than once. The same 25% happens over and over again.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, you'll see here kind of in the middle, steps 1 and 2 do not need to occur simultaneously. So I've got quite a few clients that are doing what's called a pre-funded ESOP, and they're contributing cash 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So, maybe in the example, maybe it's 250 a year for the next 4 years, $1 million. And at that point, they sell $1 million worth of stock to the ESOP. So, I mean, that is an option as well. It's not sort of, and you got to buy stock right away. That's not necessarily the case.
Perfect.
This scenario just assumes the company, rather than contributing cash, the company is looking to either the bank or the selling shareholder or both to fund some of the stock that's going to be bought from the selling shareholder.
So if you're the selling shareholder and you're being the bank, you actually have to contribute the capital. It can't just be a note, correct?
It would be a note. Yeah. So you say you sell $1 million of stock to the ESOP, you take a note back for $1 million from the company in exchange for the stock that you just sold to the ESOP. And you want the obligation from the company rather than the trust, because the company's got real assets.
Mm-hmm.
Trust, all it has is the shares of stock, that you just sold to it. And there's also, I guess, the newspaper risk. Should something go bad, you don't want to have nasty Greg Maddox, owner of XYZ business, is suing his ESOP to try to collect $1 million that they squandered.
Right.
Which typically happen, but
so this is the same conceptually, because we talk about this in our accelerator, as upon exit, if you're going to be the bank and you're going to assume a note. Like I have a client who's part of a 5th generation business he bought from his father-in-law 4 years ago. And so they have a note. He pays a monthly amount to his father-in-law per the terms of that note to buy him out. And so this is the exact same, except now we're just doing it through the ESOP.
Yeah, you get more kind of a tax advantage situation because of the fact it's in an ESOP. But yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of business owners that will swear up and down, why would I take a loan from the bank? I'm planning to be here for the next 3, 5, 7 years. I think I can get most of this note paid off over that time frame. I know the risks I'm taking on. Why wouldn't I pay myself 6%, 7% interest on my note rather than pay 4 or 5% to the bank?
And then you can take your distributions, or you could direct chunks of money that would have otherwise been distributions, could be allocated towards accelerated note repayment, which is tax advantage to the company and comes back to you as loan repayment with interest.
Bingo. Yeah.
I love that. If you got a window that you're not leaving anytime soon, why not be the bank if you have good cash flow and have confidence that you're going to get that paid off?
Yeah. Or maybe you and your partner are selling, your partner really wants the money today. Great. Then you work out a situation, an agreement with them, with your partner where, all right, you're going to get cash today. I'll take a note back, but I'm going to get paid at this rate. You're going to get paid this amount. There's a lot of ways to kind of slice and dice it when you get into the nuts and bolts of the transaction, how you want to make it look. But I've had situations like that where one partner wanted to get cash right away, whereas another partner wasn't as concerned about the cash, was willing to get paid over time. And there's ways to give them some additional benefit for being more patient, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So this one is just, like I mentioned earlier, this is a stock contribution. So you're the shareholder, you decided to contribute your stock, it's worth $5 million. You contribute $5 million of stock to the ESOP, you get a tax deduction for $5 million.
Is this typically a non-operating shareholder?
Not necessarily. It's I tend to see this on typically, very small transactions, or maybe an initial first transaction. Because I've got situations where business owners have sold or contributed stock over 10, 15 years in some cases. And they may say, all right, well, just to get started, I'm going to go ahead and contribute enough stock that it's equal to about 10% of the value of the company, or 5% of the value of the company, just to sort of get my feet wet, see how the ESOP operates, but also show the employees that I'm serious, that I continue to.
Right, because that's the thing that I want to make sure we're not forgetting, is that when you're doing this, whether it was the $250,000 note, like that's now turning into $250,000 spread across your employees' ESOP retirement accounts. It's
Right.
real benefit money for them.
Yeah. And so this is a way, just to sort of piecemeal it. Maybe we're okay. I'm just gonna contribute 5% of the stock I own to the ESOP just to get it started. Let's see how it goes for a couple of years, see what the employee engagement looks like, and then use that as the carrot, hopefully, to incent them to continue to, grow the business. And then I'll start selling more, I'll contribute more stock over time. So some typical ESOP scenarios, I think this will kind of help, maybe you're that situation where I talked about, you're one of those two business owners, you're ready to get out, you want cash, or you're the other one that doesn't, you want to get out, but you don't want to necessarily need the cash right away.
Yeah, I think this is a great one because it is common in lots of different ways. You have, whether it's the age dynamic, sometimes you just have somebody who's been the majority shareholder longer and is looking to scale back and bring the minority shareholders up. So either way, those guys are going to stick around and drive the business forward, and this person's going to step back. So there's lots of scenarios that exist where you've got that kind of, we're not all going to do the exact same thing, exact same timing. How do we make that work?
Exactly. So here, let's start out with what's a good ESOP candidate? We've obviously given you some good background at this point on ESOP, some pros and cons, that sort of thing. But what is a good ESOP? So we've talked about, you're a business owner and you want to get some liquidity. You want to take some chips off the table. Or you've got a management team in place. If you don't, you hopefully are willing to stick around whatever period of time is necessary to either develop internally folks to take on your responsibilities, or go outside the business and find folks to do that. You've got to be profitable. I get probably one call a month from somebody that's, hey, I'm just starting my business. I've got this great opportunity. I want to reward my people. And this ESOP just drives with what I want to do. Great. I believe you. I think it does, but you're not at that stage where you're even profitable yet to make it work.
And it's not a turnaround tool.
No. The fourth one there, the valuation. I mean, that's a really important one. A lot of business owners, when I'm talking to them, after we've gotten past the viability, we get in a little bit in the education. We all oftentimes kind of stop at this point where, hey, do you have a good sense what the value of your business is? Some of them do, a lot of them don't. Go out and get a valuation, get a preliminary ESOP valuation just to see what that looks like. Because I'd say 95% of the ESOP transactions that don't go through, which there aren't a lot that don't go through, but the ones that don't, it's because the offer from the ESOP trustee for the stock didn't meet expectations. Just like you or I trying to sell our home, my home is worth X. Everybody should want this home, and then nobody comes anywhere close to offering X for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Multiply that problem times 1,000 when it's a privately held business.
Right.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot in the course. We also talk about to get a formal valuation, whether it's a full or partial or whatever you want, a preliminary, but to engage a professional valuation expert. Generally speaking, I say you need to have a tax or legal reason to do that, because there's all sorts of other tools for planning purposes that get you what you need to make good decisions until you have a tax or legal need to actually have somebody professional go and do the work. This would be one of those circumstances, right, where it makes sense to get a sense of what is fair market value, because fair market value, the way that the IRS describes it, may or may not lead to the number that you think you could get in the open market, for it. If you're selling to a strategic player who would be willing to pay you a premium, and in your brain, that's just what your business is worth. So I think that's a great point. Understand that fair market value is a very specific type of valuation for tax purposes, because there's all these tax benefits of the ESOP. It's still fair, but it may not be that top level big multiple valuation that you think it might be worth. And so the sooner you are in alignment with what that is, doesn't make it not a great program to pursue, because it doesn't, you could still sell it to the strategic player down the road for that big fat multiple. Just how much money you can stuff inside the ESOP is dependent on the fair market value of the business as defined by the IRS code.
Exactly. Yeah. And we've got an affiliate group that does these preliminary appraisals. There's a lot of CPA firms that'll do them. So that's probably a good first step. Talk to your CPA, see if they're comfortable preparing it. But I've had a lot of clients that have said, hey, this is the best $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 I ever spent, because it just going through the exercise, it helped me identify some issues with my working capital or different aspects of my business or how I present my business that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So it's a good kind of trial run before you get ready for the official, Super Bowl, where you're going to go out there and try to really sell your business. Do this, and figure it out, or maybe you do it and then wait 2, 3, 5 years, so you've implemented some of the changes and get a preliminary appraisal before you incur a lot of time and expense kind of getting into any sort of sale process, be it an ESOP or some other alternative. Debt capacity, we touched on that. The company's got to have debt capacity to be able to buy the stock from the selling shareholders.
So whether that's from an actual bank or the seller note, the owner is carrying a note back. Like somehow we have to fund this. That note has to be paid back. You can't just say you did it and then the business never made note payments to the owner.
Yep, exactly.
We actually be able to fall through on it.
Right. We talked about earlier, desire to increase productivity or even, improve retention, another good one. And then community presence. I mean, there's definitely an altruistic aspect to ESOPs. I couldn't tell you how many business owners have told me, hey, I know I could sell this to any number of different buyers, but most of them are probably going to shut the business down and move it out of wherever I may live. And just because they want the book of business, or they just want some of the equipment or some of the IP, whatever it may be, they don't really care about the employees and the impact it has on that community. In ESOP, like I said, it's going to continue in that community, continue to benefit those employees, hopefully for a long time. Some bad ESOP candidates, an example would be, you don't have any sort of management depth, you don't have a succession plan, and you want to leave tomorrow. You're ready to go. You want to just sail off in the sunset. ESOP's not the solution for you. You should go talk to a private equity firm or strategic that's going to have a management team or bring a management team into place. They can do that and they'll give you a bag of money. Maybe they'll have you stick around for a while. Maybe they won't, but you need to rely on you. If you got really volatile earnings or unprofitable business, again, you're going to struggle getting a good value for your business, because it's any certified appraiser is probably going to value your business off the low end of your profitability and sort of assume that's how it's going to continue into the future. Think of a oil and gas business, I guess, where it could be pretty up and down year to year. That's a tougher business to sell in any type of format, be it ESOP or traditional M&A. Debt capacity, minority status ESOPs. I'm running status businesses. I'm running a lot of this now where you've got women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses. In order to continue to garner those benefits, you need to maintain at least 51% ownership, which is fine. I've got company I did last year up in Twin Cities, husband and wife, they sold 40% to the ESOP, which was all the husband's shares in the business, because they want to continue to garner the women-owned business benefit for 2 or 3 more years. And then they're planning to sell the other 60% of the ESOP.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
so that's not necessarily a bad candidate. Just you need to be aware.
Yeah, and it's
minority status. We got to maintain 51% with the minority shareholder.
Right. Yeah. And so in that situation, I mean, their business is evolving to the point where they're getting bigger, to the point where they're not necessarily going to garner as much of a benefit from being necessarily woman-owned in the future. And so for them, it made perfect sense to go ahead and do this in kind of 2 steps. Step 1, sell a block, sort of set them and their heirs up for the future. And then step 2, when she's ready to retire from the business, then they can sell the next block. Meantime, they're already training his replacement. He's her number 2 now. And so by the time she's ready, he'll be ready to assume number 1. And so again, kind of goes back to the first bullet, thinking about the management team, thinking about your personal objectives in terms of getting money out of the business, but also sort of the timing, and setting that up where, it can't happen over the next 3 months or 6 months. It's a multi-year process.
Yeah, that's another reason why, Menke Associates and Cultivate Advisors are great strategic partners. Like, this is right in our wheelhouse. So the type of business advising that we do is to help you build that management depth in that team that replaces you. So for somebody who's considering going down this path, if they're already working with a company like Cultivate, this just becomes part of the the business roadmap that we build in, knowing that's going to tie to your ability to get to an ESOP at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just touch on the last bullet there. Low skilled workforce doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means it's a little bit harder. So I'll give you an example would be, all right, you're an engineering firm. You've got a bunch of white collar, college educated employees. And on the other side, you've got a gritty metal bending business where maybe nobody's got more than a high school education. It's going to probably be a little more difficult for that high school educated employee to understand what the ESOP and what it means over time. So you're going to have to spend a little more time on the communication, which you're going to have to spend time on communication regardless of what your workforce is comprised of. But maybe in that case, you're going to have to spend a little bit more. So it's not necessarily a bad candidate. It just requires a little bit more time invested to get them to understand and appreciate the benefits of an ESOP. So this first, option, scenario is what we call a pre-funded ESOP. And so this is a situation kind of like a few slides back where companies making contributions for 2, 3, 5 years. And during that time, the cash is building up inside the ESOP and they're garnering a tax deduction each year they make a contribution, but it's giving flexibility to then pull the trigger, them being the selling shareholder, the flexibility when they want to pull the trigger and sell the stock. So a little more background here, you can see on this one, assume an annual payroll of $2 million. So they can pre-fund up to 25%, which is $500,000. The ESOP's going to accumulate in this scenario. Year 1, the company contributed $250,000. Year 2, they decided to only contribute $150,000. Year 3, they decide not to contribute any. Maybe it's a recession, pandemic.
Let's say it was 2020. Right.
Exactly. So there's no obligation that they have to contribute every year.
So in this example of pre-funded, they have not actually sold the shares.
Correct.
To then trigger the sub accounts where all the employees would actually have, their beneficial ownership.
Yeah. So actually it does create the ESOP. So you'd actually draft the ESOP plan and trust documents. We would draft those for you. And then the company would have the ESOP set up, be able to put on the website, letterhead, everything else, but there's no stock in the accounts. So what would happen, like in year 1, the $250,000, Greg Maddox, ESOP participant, he's going to see at the end of the year, he's going to see some cash in his ESOP account. There's not going to be any stock in there, but he's going to see some cash. Year 2, see some more cash. Year 3 doesn't change. And then maybe year 4, the board decides to go ahead and sell, or the selling shareholders go ahead and decide to sell some stock. Great. There's already $400,000 inside the ESOP.
So then I'll see my cash convert to stock.
Exactly. And then at that point, the company then, or the board has to go out and engage an outside ESOP trustee. That trustee then has to get their own legal counsel. They have to get their own appraisal, and they have to start doing annual appraisals on the business each year thereafter. But this, while it's in a pre-funded stage, there's no obligation. So this is a great way where you're sort of thinking about it. I could use the benefit because I've had some really strong years here. Like some
Yeah, and that's probably also where vesting comes into, so that people can't just start sucking money out of the cash account.
Exactly. Yeah, you get some years of service within the ESOP, and then the business owner can say, all right, yeah, now I'm ready. The business is hitting on all wheels. Cultivate's helped me boost my profitability by 30% or whatever it may be. Now it's time for me to sell some stock. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then the employees are going to see the direct impact of that, because they're going to see the cash convert to stock inside their ESOP accounts. And then they're going to start to see that value hopefully rise over time.
Right.
But let's say the business owner decides, no, I don't like the ESOP, or hey, I just got an offer from this other buyer. Great. Then all you do is you would convert this ESOP to a profit sharing plan. Your employees still get their shares. So Greg's account with the $5,000 that's sitting in there, whatever it may be, is Greg's money. It's going to sit in a profit sharing plan, and then Greg can go roll it into his IRA if he wants at some point in the future. But you don't lose that money once it's in your ESOP account. Or
So very interesting. So you set up the ESOP, you don't go through the full expense of the, the trustee, the administration, and all of that, but you're setting aside money with the intention, in this case, the 250, the 150, and then the 0, with the intention of buying company stock with it. And if something happens, or you change your mind, or you get an offer to sell, then the employees get whatever was already put in their account, because it's just cash. It becomes profit sharing.
Or exactly,
you do pull the trigger, and instead of me having $5,000 of cash, I have $5,000 of stock, and the cash is going to not go up in value over the next 10 years, but the stock should. Is the idea.
Right? Yeah. And I mean, I've got situations where business owners just said, hey, I know the value is going to go up, or I've got a couple of new contracts that are coming online. I really need to see the revenue ramp up, because that's going to boost the value of my business. So just pre-fund, get a bunch of cash built up in there, and then I don't have to worry about going to the bank, or I don't have to take back a note for as much of the stock that I'm selling, because there's already cash in there. And then meanwhile, you're still getting the benefit. You're able to tell everybody you're an ESOP, you're employee owned, because then employees are getting statements each year.
Yeah, they're going to see money in it. That's all. Hey, I got X $1,000 in my account that I didn't put in there.
Right. Yeah. And meanwhile, the value's gone up. So rather than selling at my company when it was only worth 5 million, now it's worth 15 million, or whatever the numbers may be in your particular case.
Yeah. And so instead of $5,000 worth of cash, I now have $15,000 worth of stock in my ESOP account.
Right.
Cool.
Another kind of more standard option is just kind of a gradual pay as you go. In this situation, the company is just making a cash contribution. The ESOP's going to buy, ends up being 5% of the fair market value of the company. The majority still owns 70% of the company. So the majority, in this case, majority shareholder is going to vote, as if they had 75%. So the ESOP's going to align with, in this situation, the ESOP's going to say, hey, I've got such a diminished amount of ownership in this company. Whatever, my interests are going to be aligned with the majority shareholder. And so that's the 70% owner. So I'm gonna vote with him or her, any sort of decisions that are coming from the board. And that 25% minority shareholder, they can do whatever they want, in terms of voting for themselves, but they're in a different spot. This is kind of a combination of where we had some pre-funding, in our earlier example, $400,000. We also the company also goes out to the bank and borrows $2 million. And we're going to sell 30% of the company for $3 million. And so there's a little bit of a gap. So that's $600,000 that's just funded by the selling shareholder.
So that's the note that we talked about earlier.
Yep.
400 from the pre-funding, 2 million from the bank, 600. I'm the owner. I take a note back for that.
Yeah. And then so you're subordinated to the bank. So that means is the bank has first right to getting its principal and interest paid, and then you have the second right. So generally what would happen in ESOP transaction is The bank's going to get every month or quarter, it's going to get its principal and interest payment. And probably every quarter or every year, you're going to get an interest payment on your seller note. And then as that bank note gets paid down, the bank's going to come knocking on the door and say, hey, company, we know you've got that note to the shareholder. What if we refinance it? We're only going to charge you 4%. The shareholder's charging you 6%. You know, that's a nice trade-off there. So then oftentimes you'll see the bank will then refinance that seller note. Maybe they take 300,000 of it, or maybe it's all 600,000. The company's done really well. It's generating a lot of cash, whatever the situation may be. Or maybe the seller is like, hey, I'm ready to sell a little bit more. Can we think about this as part of a bigger transaction? Maybe I keep my note outstanding. You just pay me for some more of my stock that I'm going to sell instead. So you've got a lot of different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Give you some ideas.
In each of those, go back one slide for me, please.
Yep.
In each of those examples, so in this example here, let's just say it was a solo owner, you know, who owned this company.
Mhm.
They will have gotten $2.4 million of cash to diversify into other things, plus a $600,000 note. And then if that note gets, you know, interest payments for a while, and then eventually the bank, you know, pays it off, and they want the note, they refi it, and then they get the other 600 or some version of it. But I just want to point out for the people watching this recording that in these examples, if you are Mr. or Mrs. Big who own this company, in these examples, that $2.4 million of cash is cash in your pocket that you go now to your wealth manager and figure out how to deploy in your world for diversity.
Exactly. So one thing we haven't touched on, I mean, if you're an ESOP, if you're selling stock to an ESOP, your company has to be organized as either a C Corp or an S Corp. So a lot of companies today are LLCs, for example, taxed as an S Corp. So you would first need to convert to either an S Corp or C Corp before you sold to the ESOP. So S Corp ESOPs have only been permitted since 1996. C Corps have been permitted since 1974 when the ESOP legislation went into place.
C Corp, I think, was the only option back then, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's some different tax benefits, both as a selling shareholder as well as for the company. We'll touch on those in the next couple slides here. So in this first one, let's assume you're an S corporation. You're 30% owned by an ESOP. You, as the 70% shareholder, are going to still need to pay your taxes every year because it's going to pass through the earnings of the company, and you're going to have to pay taxes on those earnings. Well, the ESOP, it's a retirement plan. It doesn't pay tax. So the ESOP doesn't have any tax obligation. However, you, Mr. and Ms. Shareholder, you still have your tax obligation. Let's assume it's $700,000 is owed to you, or you owe in taxes. So the company makes you a distribution for $700,000. It has to make a like distribution to the ESOP for $300,000 because the ESOP owns 30%. So the million is going to get 300,000. So, you know, as you've done maybe prior to being ESOP owned, you go ahead and pay your taxes to Uncle Sam on the 700,000 that you owe. The ESOP says, great, I got $300,000. This is awesome, but I don't have a need for this money. So the money just sits in the ESOP. It can then be used to pay down the loan quicker if you want. You know, if you want to, we can go ahead and you can give the money back to the company to pay down the debt to the bank or the selling shareholder more quickly, or maybe the money just sits in there to be used to buy back shares from the 70% shareholders that are ready to sell more stock. You know, similar to that pre-funded ESOP we talked about a couple slides ago. I'm going to go out and borrow.
It's a different way of pre-funding, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
where's the money's already in there?
You know, the tax distribution as required.
Exactly. Yeah. Or there's what's called the repurchase obligation. That's when the employee dies, retires, leaves the business. You have to buy back, the ESOP has to buy back their stock within a period of time. So you could just treat it as a sort of a sinking fund and have that money there ready for when employees die, retire, leave. You know, so you've got some different options, but meanwhile, Greg, the ESOP participant's going to see in his account, hey, I've got a bunch of ESOP shares at XYZ company, but I've also got some cash now. They must have done some sort of distribution. So from Greg's standpoint, he doesn't care. He's got cash and shares in his account, and it's gone up. So it's a win-win for him. Here's another scenario. Let's assume 100% of your company is owned by an S corporation. That's the case, then you pay no federal taxes. I'll repeat that, no federal taxes. So this is unique to an S corp ESOP, 100% owned, it has no federal tax obligations, and depending on what state you're located in, you may have no state tax obligations either. I'm in Illinois, like Greg. Illinois recognizes the S corp ESOP tax exemption. So if you're an Illinois company headquartered here, and you're 100% owned, you don't pay any federal or state tax obligations. That's similar in a lot of states across the country. I mean, there's some exceptions here and there.
I want to be clear though. So if somebody, you sold 100% of your shares of your company to the ESOP. So now you have, but you're still taking money out of the business to fund your lifestyle, right? So you're paying taxes on that money, correct?
Yep.
So if you have a salary, you'll pay normal taxes on that. You no longer can take distributions because you sold 100% of the business to the ESOP. So you're no longer an owner. So there's no distribution for you to take. The company can choose to bonus you, in which case you'll pay your normal taxes. But what you're saying is, if you have $1 million in profit right now and you own 100% of your business, no ESOP, you only paid yourself $250,000 over the course of the year. Uncle Sam still wants you to pay income taxes on the other 750. You got to pay income tax on the full $1 million of profit because it all passes through. In this example, you got paid your 250, the 750 just is sitting in the ESOP and doesn't have to pay taxes.
Yep. Yeah. And what you tend to see with these older, more mature, 100% owned S corp ESOPs is they don't have any debt outstanding or very little. They've got a lot of cash in their balance sheet, and they're growing like crazy. They're either through internal funding growth, a new manufacturing line, a new service offering, or externally, they're going out making acquisitions and growing the business that way. So it's
all that money that they would have paid in taxes is sitting on the balance sheet for them to use for the growth of the company.
Exactly.
That's in the right situation. That'd be super attractive.
Yeah. So if you're a C corporation today and you're thinking about, well, hey, I really like that idea of going and becoming an S corp because I can take advantage of the tax shield as an ESOP S corp. There are definitely some advantages. You get, especially if it's just a partial, like we talked about, you're going to continue to get distributions for tax purposes. You're only going to be taxed once. But there's some disadvantages to 1042. We're going to talk about here in the next slide or two. That's available to C corp companies that sell to an ESOP. It's the ability to defer tax capital gains on their proceeds. There are some other testing requirements, particularly the fourth bullet here, 409P testing. So that's a requirement of the IRS where you have to demonstrate as an S corp that the shares are being allocated broadly, not just predominantly to your highly compensated employees.
And I'll just say this, that like all things, when we touch on taxation at transaction of a sale, let's say, in our program, we use some generalities just we're earmarking some friction there, percentage wise. But we also say that, listen, it's super complex the way that a business is actually going to get taxed at the end of the day. All the calculations, what can be, the different tax shelters that might be available, what's going to get recaptured, what's not going to get recaptured. So it's a complex, recipe. And so I think that today is the same thing. Like there are definitely some huge tax advantages to doing this, but there's also these kind of eyes wide open things that's why you hire a good, we talk about that exit planning in general is not just about the end. It's really about getting what you want starting now. And that means you have to have the right team. You need somebody who's an expert at tax and legal of CPA who's forward-looking, a wealth manager who understands business owner stuff, and work with them over time. And in this kind of example, you'd be working with those people to really go through the ins and outs of this so that you knew exactly what the impact was of making a decision. It might be outside the scope of trying to get too much into the detail of all this different tax code for these guys before we have just eyes glazed over about various tax codes, when the truth is that you want to highlight the kind of the big pluses and kind of generally speaking the big minuses to be aware of. Doesn't mean it's not a good deal. It means that you got to talk to the right professional to help you put pen to paper on this stuff and know how it's going to affect you before you make a decision.
Exactly. So now we're going to transition over and talk about C corporation ESOPs. You try to compare and contrast them against the S corporations because it's a little different how the tax works on the company side as well as on the selling shareholder side. So what we have here is 1042 tax deferral of capital gains. It's only available if you're a C corp. So if you were a C corp and you just converted recently to an S corp, you're stuck. You have to stay an S corp for 5 years before you can convert back to a C corp, and vice versa. But if you're a C corporation today, or you don't have that restriction, and you're an LLC or an S corp today, and you've been that for a period of time, you can go ahead and convert to a C corp. And then as long as you or your business partners or other shareholders are willing to sell at least 30% of the stock or more to the ESOP, and you reinvest those proceeds in the next 12 months in what's called QRP, qualified replacement property, you can go ahead and defer the capital gains tax in your proceeds. So that's significant. I mean, right now, most people probably on this call are in the 23.8% federal, plus depending on what state you reside in, you may have state capital gains as well. You're probably talking 30% or more of your proceeds are going to go pay capital gains tax on a transaction. So if you
give an example of QRP.
Yeah, so an example of QRP would be, blue chip stocks, bonds of U.S. domestic companies. I think I got an example here. No, maybe I don't. Yeah, I don't. I have a slide sometimes that I use that shows examples. You don't have it today, but I mean, generally it's most of the profits are from the company itself. Like an example would be that doesn't qualify would be McDonald's, for example. A lot of the profit of McDonald's is generated by non-corporate owned entities, i.e. the franchisees are generating a lot of the revenue for the business. So that wouldn't be eligible. Or a Berkshire Hathaway, where pieces of all these different companies, that wouldn't be eligible. But, think of like a Microsoft, for example, or a UPS. I mean, companies like that, Florida Power and Light, those are all companies that would be eligible. And so generally you would work with your stockbroker. If you don't have a broker, I'm happy to introduce you to some that are familiar with this strategy. They would put you in a diversified portfolio. So you probably have your investments spread across 30, 50, call it a number of different investments. So again, should one of those fail over your lifetime, especially if you're young, you may be living for another 40, 50, 60 years. You want to sort of outlive that, because if you sell any of these investments before your death, you will then trigger the capital gains tax on whatever you sell. However, if you don't sell any of it, when you pass, it'll go to your heirs at a stepped up basis. They can then sell it at the current market rate and not pay any capital gains tax. So it's a phenomenal benefit if you live with those restrictions.
Yeah. And then if you have the complexity, meaning you're successful enough in your business that your finances are good enough over time, then there's advanced planning techniques that can roll into this, that tie into your estate planning, et cetera, that can also help maximize the benefit of this even at death. So lots of different ways to do that. If you qualify for that, generally speaking, I'd say if you're making, between 600,000 on up of taxable income and growing over time, then some of these more advanced strategies that exist out there could tie in with this. And it just, generally speaking, it's just advanced ways of doing your tax and estate planning in accordance with these types of things. So there's lots of different ways to do this when you start having that complexity.
Yep, exactly. So similar to that earlier slide, if you're an S corporation today, you're contemplating going to a C corporation. What are the advantages? Like we just talked about, that 1042, the deferral of capital gains is a significant advantage. You have more than one class of stock. If you're maybe not selling 100% of the stock to the ESOP, great. You are going to be double taxed though. You're going to be paying more potential corporate taxes, and then you have to wait 5 years. So if you convert from an S to a C or C to an S, you've got that 5-year holding period.
Yeah, if you don't have some of these other great benefits, or the requirement, because you have, there's other requirements for C Corp, like I think it's foreign investors and more complex, capital structure. A C Corp for most small businesses at sale is just a horrible place to be because of the double taxation. So unless you have these strategic things built in over time that would offset that and make it, make that worth it, when you're only talking about, a few $1,000,000 or however many $1,000,000, and you get it double taxed and you see half of it go out the door, not come into your retirement account at the end of the day, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the tax shield works a little differently as a C Corp ESOP than an S Corp. The S Corp we talked about, it's just dependent on what percentage is owned. That portion is not taxed. Whereas a C Corp, the tax benefits directly attributable to the payroll of the company. So if you have a small payroll, let's say your payroll's $1 million, which isn't small, but just make the math simple. Again, in your maximum contribution you can make to the ESOP is $250,000. So that'd be the maximum tax shield as a C Corp. If that's all your payroll is $1 million, would be $250,000. And if you're generating, say, $1 million of taxable income every year, only $750,000 of that you'd have to pay tax on. So you'd be able to shield $250,000 only in that case. Whereas it doesn't matter as an S Corp what your payroll looks like. You get that benefit regardless. So that's something else you have to think about. I mean, I've got examples where I've got companies with a lot of employees, a lot of payroll. Think of like a grocery store, for example, or a big contractor where you've just got hundreds of employees. You may have enough payroll where it makes sense. Yeah, 25% of my $30 million payroll is a big number. I can shield a lot of taxable income if that's the case. So that's something else that you have to go through when you do your analysis around is Corp or S Corp is the best option for me if I'm going to.
And that's part of your step one, right? Discovering design is figuring all this stuff out and pulling in the right people to help you think it through.
Yep. So the next part is valuation. We've obviously talked about this a lot, from a preliminary standpoint, but the valuation is also important for the actual transaction. I mean, that's where, again, the ESOP trustee is an independent fiduciary hired by your board to represent the ESOP in the transaction. They're going to engage a financial advisor or an appraisal firm to do the valuation. Similar to, a lot of us have dealt with valuation from, maybe a home ownership standpoint. It's similar on a business standpoint. We've talked about fair market value, kind of a willing buyer, willing seller, like Greg mentioned earlier. Again, that's sort of the restrictions that an ESOP trustee is bound by on every transaction they do. And if you Google it, and I'm being fully transparent, you Google ESOP litigation, you're going to see most of the litigation that's out there. And there's not tons and tons of it, but there is litigation out there. A lot of it is around valuation. So it's an important component. You want to make sure your advisor is experienced, even if it's not Menke Associates, it's someone that's done a lot of ESOP transactions that know the players that are experienced that are out there. Because there's always folks that are showing up and saying, yeah, I can do ESOP valuations, or I've done ESOP transactions, and then they probably haven't, or they haven't done many. I wouldn't want to be a guinea pig with one of them. There's enough.
Litigation usually is upon separation. Think of spouses getting divorced and trying to figure out how much somebody's owed, partners getting divorced and deciding how much someone's owed. Obviously the person who has to pay the bill wants the lowest possible valuation. The person who's going to receive the proceeds wants the highest possible valuation. We argue about the definition of fair market value, because just like anything, it's a range. That's why I said, generally speaking, because of this, an experienced ESOP valuation firm knows where to land on that. And it tends to be, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to be more conservative of a number. Doesn't mean it's not a good number, but it's going to be more conservative of a number because they're thinking about it being defensible if they had to, go in front of a judge and explain their numbers, and that it doesn't get blown up and say, well, yeah, you overvalued this thing by, 50% higher than it should be. And now all those
Right.
all those tax benefits, everything needs to get unwound now. So if you're going to do this, you got to work with the right people for sure. And just eyes wide open. Fair market value valuation is a very specific valuation that you might think is conservative. And it probably is for, all the reasons that we talked about. But the purpose of this fair market valuation is not for you to exit your company. Like if you wanted to sell this to a third party later, they'd pay you whatever, you think is worth later. But for the benefit of putting an ESOP in place, you have to follow the rules set by the government for all the benefits of the ESOP. And that's, why Matt said on the front end, be aware of what that number is, so that whatever chips you're pulling off the table, whatever percentage that you're selling, that of the fair market value, that equals enough cash for you to, execute on your bigger strategic personal plan, and over time. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. Anytime I've seen somebody look at a true fair market valuation compared to, what they might view a strategic or even a financial buyer might be higher, just depending, that they could say, well, geez, this seems like a real low ball. Not always, but sometimes if they have some idea of what businesses are being sold for, and if those businesses that they're aware of are being sold to strategics, people willing to pay a premium, and in my brain as a business owner, think that that's just what fair market is, I might be disappointed when I see a fair market valuation done for ESOP purposes.
Right.
Because I'm comparing apples and oranges, and I just don't know it.
Well said. Yeah. So we've touched on a bunch of these things. Why do they have to do evaluation? It's required by the Department of Labor and the IRS. It's a way to set a value for the business every year. So it's done at the time of the transaction, and then every fiscal year end, an updated valuation is done after that. I will say it can and often is more conservative, but it takes into account any other offers you may have. So if you're coming in to me and saying, all right, I want to do an ESOP transaction, I also have these two offers that I've received over the last 3 years. Great. This is data we can present to the trustee and their appraiser. They're going to factor that into their valuation. And so if those buyers, assuming those are financial buyers, they're going to factor those in. I mean, if it's the strategic, like Greg said, strategic's probably paying a premium. They're probably going to discount that offer a little bit because of the fact there aren't going to be the synergies that the strategic buyer was going to obtain from the ESOP buying the business.
Right. Yeah. So it's not right or wrong. They're both 100% correct for their application. What I'm talking about is mindset of the owner, because these are the things that kill deals, which could also kill the ESOP, which could be the perfect move for you. And then you see a fair market value and get all pissed off because you think it's a BS low number. Not necessarily that it won't solve your problem, but just because you think your business is worth way more, why is it coming in your mind so much less? You just need to reframe and be aware of, the purpose of an ESOP valuation and why you're doing an ESOP in the first place. If we can solve what you need solved with an ESOP strategically now and over time, that doesn't preclude you selling to a strategic later for the value in your head you think is really worth. But these are two separate things. And that's where I see, in my experience, just on valuation in general, owners getting hung up because they take it personally. They don't take time to get educated ahead of time on how and why these numbers are used. And they just take it as a personal insult if the number thrown out is not in alignment with their expectation. And they usually walk at that point as opposed to dig in to understand why.
Yeah, no, I mean, in my experience, the ESOP transactions that haven't gone forward, it's been exactly that. The owner had a number in his or her head, and it was much higher than what fair market value was, or even a range of fair market value was for the business. And it's unfortunate, but it happens, and they have every right to do that. They're the owner of the.
And they could sell it to a third party that would give them that number hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
It's precluded. In our thinking too, in the financial freedom portion of our philosophy is, with growing the value of the business the way we want to over time, we're also separating wealth over time, which now makes it more palatable for me if fair market value is a little bit less than what I thought my number was, because I already have liquid assets and or other passive income producing assets that are not my core business. I already have those set up, or I'm building those on the outside. So if the fair market value comes in a little bit light compared to what I wanted, I'm still okay, because I've been planning for this over time to get to this point. Most business owners don't do that. They think about this stuff at the last minute. I'm ready to start taking chips off the table. This is what's going to do it for me. And if the math for the fair market value and what I can or cannot structure inside my ESOP doesn't net me what I want to walk with right now, I could be disappointed, because I had not really done any planning for it up to this point, which is what we're trying to solve for in my program, whether it's ESOP or exit operationally or anything in between, give you more options, but it takes prep work, to get you from where you are to that point in time. It just doesn't take forever, but it does take some planning.
Yep. Yeah. No, well said. This slide just sort of, speaks for itself. I mean, what are some of the criteria the appraiser uses when they're doing the valuation? It's looking outside your business, looking at your industry, what type of business you're operating in that industry, or what part of that industry your business operates in, but also looking at the economy. That's a big factor in it. But then it's also looking at, your historical performance. What are your earnings? Do you have a lot of add backs, owner operator expenses that were run through the business? Great. We need to add those back to arrive at a true kind of operating cash flow of the business going forward. And then what are the expectations of the business going forward? And do those align with, say, other industry metrics as well as your historical results?
And just the strength of your financials. If you've been keeping pretty crummy books all by yourself in QuickBooks, you go in once or twice a year and catch up, or do you have really professionally done books that people have a high degree of confidence in the numbers that are being put forth? That will have an impact on the valuation. I guarantee that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of the ESOP transactions I work on, the trustees want to see, if you haven't gotten at least reviewed financials in the past, they'll want to see that going forward, just to know the numbers you're submitting. Or
like once you actually have one, for sure, right?
Yeah.
We got to solve that problem. But it might be something that precludes you from getting your number, not because your business isn't worth it, because there's not enough confidence in the numbers that are being used to do the math.
Mm-hmm.
Because of just the sloppy nature that a lot of business owners, they don't tend to put a lot behind that until they need to, until something forces them to professionalize their bookkeeping better.
Exactly. Yeah. I've got one client that I was working with. They have two businesses they're selling to the ESOP, and they had never consolidated the financials. So, guys, we need to have a consolidated set of financials. That's going to raise red flags for the trustee team. If they come in and see that you've got two totally separate entities, they don't know about the two any sort of intercompany eliminations. We need to get something consolidated. And so they spend time.
Yeah, which is time and money,
vendor.
which I can see why you didn't want to do it. It's a pain in the butt job. Like, even the people who are good at it, it costs a lot in the form of time and money. So I can see why you wouldn't want to do it, but it makes all the sense in the world to have it done, for these purposes. You're talking about your employees' retirement and yours, and you're talking about ERISA and Department of Labor. This is serious stuff, and there's lots of great tax benefits for doing it, but we got to do it right. So.
Yeah, and funny, just side note on that one, my business owner client afterwards said, "Hey, I really like it looking at the financials.
Wow, this makes so much
easier.
It's a lot easier. I wish I would have spent this money years ago."
Yeah. So I laughed at that, but
that's awesome.
And is the ESOP price higher, lower, the same as a third-party sale? Yes, no, maybe. Again, it really depends. There are quite a few failed sales where you try to sell to a private equity or some other buyer, and it didn't happen. And then they came across the ESOP and ended up going that route. But the second bullet there, I mean, you can always sort of test the ESOP offer first and then go out to market. I've got one client right now in Michigan that's doing that. They got the offer from the ESOP. They're going out and they're running a process for the next 3 or 4 months, see if they can solicit any other offers for the business. And if not, if they can't, or they don't like those other offers, whatever they may be, price or who the buyer is, or what changes they make,
Then do the ESOP.
they'll go back to the ESOP done next year. A lot of the initial ESOP transactions are partial sales. It's a great way to sort of dip your toe in the water, see if you like it. If it works for you, your management team, your employees, great. Then maybe you sell the rest at some point, or sell some more blocks like John Menke's done with my firm over time.
Yeah, I love that because it's in alignment with my philosophy anyway, which is, if we're building towards something in the future of growing the value of this company, of creating, the business in a valuable way. So it gives me time and money. I can take some of that time and money to invest in other liquid and income producing resources that are not my core business, and do it in a way that I can still have a life outside of my business. You don't need to have forever, but if you have some track to run on, then the first bite at the apple for the ESOP doesn't have to be the home run that you retire on, right? Because I can grow the value of the company, the shares in the ESOP go up, and my future sales of shares of my company to the ESOP are worth more. And I'm still solving for my lack of liquidity, like most business owners have. They're wholly illiquid relative to their whole picture of net worth, 70, 80+% tied up inside of their business versus other resources. So even if you don't have the fair market value, price isn't as much as what a third party sale would be, it could still work out because you're still taking some chips off the table. You're still putting some money into other things, and you still have the ability to grow this business over time and sell more of it to the ESOP or to a third party later. So I hate if someone, chops off their nose to spite their face because they see the initial numbers not in alignment with what they think the end number should be. And now if you are in that spot where like, I need it to happen now, and I need to fully solve my financial hole with this first chunk, or I'm selling all of it, I'm going to sell 100% of ESOP. That's going to solve my retirement dilemma. And then now you realize that the first time you're starting to take a look at what the value, you start focusing on value for the first time ever, as opposed to revenue and cash flow. You might be in for a rude awakening. But if you're doing it with some lead time, it doesn't matter really, as long as it's in the ballpark, the value, and what you can do strategically is in alignment with where you want to go. This could still work, and we grow towards that, what I'll call the future big number that you really want or believe it's worth. So exactly. It's the lack of planning when I need this first transaction to really solve all of my lack of planning. That's when the lack of alignment on value becomes a deal killer, because I need it to happen. Like either this solves my problem or it doesn't. And then I need to move on to try to find somebody who's willing to write me a bigger check, which is not a given either.
No. A couple of these other bullets, I'm not, you can participate in the ESOP even if you're the selling shareholder, as long as you're not taking that deferral of capital gains, the section 1042 that we talked about earlier. If you do that, then you can't also double dip and participate in the ESOP, but you could theoretically sell 100% of your stock as an S Corp and then participate in the ESOP as a selling shareholder. So, that's a nice, feature upside there. Another thing we didn't talk about, kind of the next bullet, is warrants. Oftentimes, a lot of my clients, when they're taking back a substantial seller note,
You're still stuck on the previous slide.
Oh,
that's okay. There we go.
Now, does that work now?
I'm on the, there we go. Okay, we're there.
Yeah. Okay. So the second to last bullet here, warrants is another way to incent selling shareholders. You can take your note back, get a nice interest rate on that, but oftentimes you'll get warrants, which are this financial instrument that's kind of attached to the notes. It gives you the right to exercise and convert them into stock at a future date, generally after the debt's paid off, and it's at a value equal to 10, 15% of the value of the company in 5, 7, 10 years from now. So you get that second bite at the apple that way. So it's a nice, kicker on top of everything else, and gives you incentive of, well, hey, I just sold a big chunk of my stock. I've got the seller note, getting it paid down. I'm taking some risk, no guarantee it's going to get fully paid off. Well, now, hey, I've got warrants there. I'm going to really put my foot pedal to the metal and really try to drive the growth of this business, pay down the debt as quickly as possible, so then I can go ahead and exercise my warrants.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, it's if you're doing all those things to be able to exercise warrants, you're running the business the right way in the, everybody's best interest, and so you ought to be able to get some upside for that.
Yep. So control, that's a big one for a lot of business owners. They tell me about, well, I want to get money off the table, and often I want to reward my employees or retain my employees.
We've got about 5 minutes.
Okay, is control. And an ESOP, you don't give up control. I mean, there are some changes to your board. The ESOP trustee is going to have someone on that board representing the trustee. But again, the board's going to be guiding the management team. Management team's going to be making all the decisions to run the business. So they're going to have the day-to-day responsibility. The trustee's not getting involved in that. That's essentially what this slide talks about, except in major situations where there is voting. For example, a sale of the business, liquidation, bankruptcy, significant events like that. That's when there's votes that pass through them. So how does the plan operate? So, this is kind of the most important part for your employees. How am I eligible to get to participate? How do I get contributions? I.e. the shares that are allocated in my account. What's the vesting, and then distribution policy. You have required disclosures for the employees. We talked about that before. Sorry, I have one other slide I normally have after this. It's not in here, but so eligibility is generally 1,000 hours of service a year and employed in the last day of the year. So 1,000 hours works out to like 20 some hours a week.
Yeah, about halftime, right?
Yeah. So, but you can adjust that down if you want. Maybe you've got a stay-at-home dad or mom, or part-time stay-at-home dad or mom that only works 800 hours of work a year. You could lower that to 800, so they're able to participate in the ESOP. And then that's a test every year. They have to demonstrate they've worked 1,000 hours and employed in the last day. Vesting, it's generally 2 options, but you can modify it as long as you don't make it more restrictive. One is a 3-year cliff, where after 3 years you're 100% vested, or 6-year graduated. So after year 2, you're 20%, 3, 40%. So after 6 years, you're 100% vested.
Mm-hmm.
Distribution policy, it's generally if you die, retire, leave the business, the year after that happens, you start getting paid out. You die, retire, become disabled. The year after you leave, you get paid out increments of 20% a year over the next 5 years. If you just leave the business and you're, say, 40 years old, you have to wait a little longer. You have to wait 5 years after the year you left, and then you get paid out 20% a year over the next 5 years.
So we don't have the 59 and a half.
So you don't have the 59 and a half. I mean, it's generally whatever retirement age you set. The maximum could be 65 years of age.
But like if I leave you're paying it out. Well, maybe let me ask this question. If I leave, I'm working at Corporation A and I got $100,000 in my 401k and I leave, I roll that over in an IRA. I don't take that money as income. It just rolls into an IRA and stays tax deferred. So if I'm, and I wouldn't want to take it as income until I was 59 and a half, because there's an extra 10% penalty
right
on taking that money, because the government wants it to be for retirement and not for, other types of emergencies up until then. So does it work the same way? You're going to just pay me out 20% a year and I just pay ordinary income on it and that's my money? Or do I roll it into something else that's qualified?
Either one. Yeah. Obviously, if you're not 59 and a half or older, you're going to want to roll it into an IRA.
So we still have that same requirement then?
Yes. Yeah. You'd still have the penalty and the taxes if you do it.
So I guess the difference is you're not going to roll it over 100% like you get at a typical 401k, because that money is held inside of, ABC mutual fund, versus this is money that's actually your company stock, your private company stock, and you need to have a runway to wind that down to buy it back, basically.
Right. Yeah. So then it's paid out over, that 5-year or 10-year period. As you get those payouts, just take the money, park it in an IRA, and invest it in a diverse.
Yeah. Whoever you work with, your guy or gal, and have them do something with that money.
Exactly.
So this goes back to your sinking fund. Like that would be a use for your sinking fund with that
Exactly.
excess cash.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. Next one, just, disclosure to participants. You don't have to share company financial statements, officer salary, the annual valuation. None of that is required to be shared. Some companies do operate more of kind of an open book approach where maybe they'll share a snapshot of some of the financials of the business because the employees start to think and act like owners. They start asking for more information. Do the ESOPs improve productivity? Yeah, there's a lot of results out there about just the success of ESOP over the last 36 years. I mean, it's quite a few employees, really see the value in it. It's just, again, communication's important. You've got to make sure they're aware of it, what it means for them, and teach them about it. And then you'll see the direct correlation in terms of lower turnover, higher morale, hopefully nice retirement accounts as well. So next steps, typical ESOP installation timing is typically about 90 to 120 days. If a bank's involved, I usually add an extra 30 days onto it. So call it 150 days, start to finish. That's from the point where you've done all your analysis, you've done your education, maybe you've done a preliminary appraisal, and you've told me, all right, I'm ready to move forward with an ESOP. I want to sell X amount. Let's go.
Cool. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to stop it there. I've got the next appointments kind of backing up against us right now. You guys, I know you've talked to a couple people from our initial cohort. Yeah, great. Put this on here. Here's Matt's contact information. If you have more questions, if we have enough people who want more kind of Q&A time, we could schedule a time where we go live with Matt and a group where we can do Q&A. If you just want to reach out to him directly, here's his information. Email is probably the best way. There's his phone number. I know that a couple guys have done that where they've had a conversation with him, and it was just kind of introductory. This would probably be a great next step for those guys to go and get educated. Excuse me.
Absolutely.
But if after having watched this, you're like, hey, I think I might fit somewhere in there, and maybe it's not like immediate, maybe it's 6 months or 12 months from now or whatever, that you think, hey, I think I'm fairly close that this could be a fit. I would say just give Matt a call and have a conversation and see if it seems like that it could be a fit. He'll let you know. If not, he'll let you know that too. And if it does seem like, hey, we're a little bit closer to this, he was showing you a minute ago that he's got a questionnaire that you could fill out and they could use to kind of guide those the conversations and next steps.
Yep.
So Matt, I want to say thank you so much, man, for taking the time to help educate us on this. You knocked the dust off of some of my understanding of ESOPs. It's been a few years since I've gone through any kind of training and classes on this. So thank you for that. I'm excited that you guys are partners with us at Cultivate. There are a lot of people inside of our membership who could take advantage of the types of services that you guys offer. And so I just want to say thank you for doing this, and then looking forward to hopefully having a Q&A with some people and you in the not so distant future.
That would be great. Yeah. Appreciate it. Letting me participate today. Thanks a lot, Greg.
All right. Have a great one.
You too.